Hi, I'm Steve from the Rooted Podcast, and I hope you can join me every weekday for a 5-minute or less devotional word study or insight into Scripture to add to your day. Welcome to Fruit Snacks. Hey everyone. In this episode, I wanted to look at a point of doctrine that sometimes is confusing because of the way that we use language compared to how the Bible uses the same language. And what I mean is this idea of spiritual bodies that Paul talks about in 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Isn't a spiritual body a contradiction in terms? Well, not at all. But part of the confusion is because of the way that we tend to use the word spiritual. For us, almost exclusively, spiritual means immaterial, non-physical, intangible, but that is not how the biblical writers conceived of spiritual things. To them, spiritual things were just as real and just as tangible as the physical world. And we know that because of the way that Paul talks about spiritual bodies in 1 Corinthians 15. Let's take a look at one passage in particular, and we'll pick it up in verse 42. Paul says, "So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the natural, and then the spiritual. The first man was from earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven." There's a few things to unpack here, but in terms of spiritual bodies, one thing that we should note is that when Paul contrasts the spiritual body, he's not contrasting it with a physical body, but a natural body. And that's a key distinction, because in Paul's mind, if you look at the other terms that he uses, what is a natural body? Well, it's one that is perishable, verse 42. Sown in dishonor, it will wear out, it will fade over time. Weak, something that was never intended or able to last for eternity. But by implication, the contrast is that a spiritual body is all of those things. It is imperishable, and it is something that is fit for all of eternity. And if we look at verse 49, the last verse that we read, Paul says that we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. Well, that would be Jesus. And when Jesus was resurrected, he most certainly possessed a body, even though it was different than the kind of body that he had had before his death. His was a resurrected and glorified body, and it was a template for the kind of body that we would have in heaven. We know this because Jesus is called the firstborn from among the dead. If we want to know what our resurrection bodies will be like, we need to look at Jesus' resurrected body for the template. Part of what this tells us and teaches us is that when God created humans, part of what being a human is to be embodied. We were created as a embodied soul, and God's intention for us is to be an embodied soul throughout all of eternity, so that we don't need to worry that heaven is going to be so unlike what we're used to here that we couldn't possibly conceive of it. In fact, in Revelation, we know that there will be a new heaven and a new earth. So at the end of it all, in heaven, we'll actually be in a physical place with physical bodies doing physical things, except that God will be there and we'll be able to enjoy Him for all of eternity. So don't think of spiritual as somehow non-physical. Think of spiritual and spiritual bodies as those things that are fit for God's presence and that belong to Him. And that is what we are. We belong to God, and He will someday give us a spiritual body that is fit to live with Him forever.